North Korea's internet went dark in the middle of January. At first, the world reached for familiar explanations. A retaliatory state strike, a secretive military operation, the kind of cyber diplomacy that leaves capitals whispering. But the truth was stranger and smaller and somehow more personal. A one-man operation launched from a modest apartment, a researcher who answered to a handle, P4X. A year earlier, P4X was doing the quiet, obsessive work of many security researchers. Reading code, cataloging vulnerabilities, exchanging tools and notes with peers. One night, he opened a file someone had sent him, a seemingly useful utility that promised to make his work easier. It arrived in a secure virtual machine, and at first, nothing appeared wrong. Then he read a blog post. Researchers were being targeted with booby-trapped files. The file he'd been sent contained a backdoor, a covert doorway meant to steal tools and research. He had been singled out by people acting on behalf of Pyongyang. He was shaken, not just by the intrusion, but by what followed. A perfunctory call from an agent, a statement taken, and then silence. Weeks turned into months. There was no follow-up, no coordinated protection, no reprisal. A private citizen, probed by a foreign nation's spies, felt exposed and utterly alone. That sense of abandonment ferments into resentment. For P4X, it became a moral imperative. If governments wouldn't defend those who study and expose these digital threats, perhaps individuals must push back. Not with bluster or headline-grabbing claims, but with a surgical response that targeted the thing Pyongyang used to speak to the outside world, its tiny, fragile slice of the global internet. He began to study it. North Korea's presence on the public internet is not a vast, resilient network. It is a sliver, a few administrative domains, some propaganda portals, email servers that handle external correspondence. To an outsider viewing it technically, the environment looked neglected. Outdated software, unpatched services, simple misconfigurations, old mistakes left to accumulate inside a closed system. For someone familiar with the contours of cyber defenses, it felt like a house with unlocked back doors. But curiosity is not the same as malice. P4X did not set out to wreak havoc for its own sake. He wanted to prove a point, that reckless offensive behavior directed at private citizens could be answered, and that a regime that sent spies after researchers should not be able to do so with impunity. He told himself he would aim for the regime's external apparatus, government sites, propaganda outlets, services that served as a window to the world, and he would avoid harming ordinary people who had no access to those platforms anyway. He did not rush. He watched and mapped in silence, cataloging patterns and weak points at a technical level, the way a security researcher documents vulnerabilities without publishing exploit code. He prepared scripts and automated routines that could stress fragile services, designed at a conceptual level to overwhelm weakly defended gateways and force them offline. He weighed risks, legal consequences in his own country, the possibility of violent reprisal by those who would be humiliated, and the moral balance of striking a closed regime while minimizing collateral harm. When he finally acted, it was late. Ordinary. He sat in his living room in an old t-shirt and pajama pants, a cup of coffee gone cold on the desk, and he executed what he had prepared. There were no fanfares, no trumpet calls. Packets left his machine and routed through rented servers. A cascade of automated probes and pressure sent toward targets that, in a properly defended world, would have been resilient. In North Korea, they were not. One by one, the sites blinked out. An airline booking page, the regime's web portal, the state news outlet. Each went dark, returning simple timeouts to anyone trying to reach them. Outside monitoring services, the kind that chart uptime for sites around the world, lit up with anomalies. Analysts who watch internet borders saw a wave of outages across the country's few public nodes. Theories raced around intelligence circles and tech forums. A state-sponsored operation, a punitive strike by an ally, an internal error. No one suspected a single anonymous researcher. For P4X, the result was vindication more than victory. The blackout was symbolic, an embarrassment for a regime that prides itself on control, and a message to the dozens of operatives who had traded in deceit and intrusion. A solo actor disrupting those channels could unintentionally sabotage larger strategic efforts. Legal scholars were blunt. Hacking is illegal regardless of motive, and the domestic laws that punishingly define unauthorized access do not recognize righteous cause. The risk was not just criminal indictment, it was the unpredictable escalation that might follow being identified. P4X understood these perils. He had watched law enforcement responses carefully and built layers of operational security. He avoided personal publicity. He avoided blow-by-blow disclosures that would teach others how to replicate his work. He framed his actions as a moral corrective rather than a campaign of destruction. I wanted to affect the government as much as possible and the people as little as possible, he would later tell an anonymous interlocutor. For him, taking down a few state-facing websites felt like tearing down the regime's billboards, symbolic acts of resistance more than strategic sabotage. P4X's blackout demonstrated the fragility of a tightly controlled digital ecosystem and highlighted the real dangers posed by state-level cyber espionage. It also opened a dangerous door. If a single anonymous researcher could disrupt a country's online presence, what might a collective of less scrupulous actors accomplish? What if retaliation were not symbolic, but destructive? For now, P4X remains unpunished and unidentified. The world continues to speculate about that night's outages. Governments quietly probe, analysts sift logs, and Pyongyang tightens its digital defenses in whatever ways it can. In small forums and encrypted channels, the Funk Project's sparse membership debates goals and limits, weighing the line between protest and provocation. The story is a mirror of our age. When state power meets individual capability, responsibility becomes a shared problem. Technology flattens the distance between a researcher's keyboard and a nation's network. It amplifies grievances, allows new forms of protest, and complicates old rules about sovereignty and justice. P4X's actions forced a peculiar reckoning. The world must ask whether it wants cyber defense to be the exclusive business of states, or whether accountability will increasingly be written in the hands of those who dwell in the gray spaces between law and conscience. In the end, the blackout was as much a moral experiment as a technical feat, a test of what one person, motivated by anger and a brittle sense of justice, could do. It exposed vulnerabilities, embarrassed a regime, and provoked a debate that will not easily be settled. And it left unanswered the oldest question of all. When laws fail, who becomes the judge? This is Data Heist, the dark side of data. Subscribe for more digital heists from the dark side of our connected world.